My name is Namrata Pandey. I'm from the University of Hong Kong. I look after its operations in India. That's why I am here, and I'm based in Delhi. My co-presenters are Jasmine and Sophia. Jasmine is from Yale-NUS. Would you like to?
So good morning, everyone. I'm Sophia, and I'm the admissions coordinator for Nagoya University in Japan. And I'm originally from India, but living in Japan right now for a couple of years and taking care of admissions. Also graduated from Nagoya University, so I've been through that student path as well. And yes, I'll just pass it on to Jasmine.
Morning, everyone. So I'm Jasmine. I'm the director of admissions at Yale-NUS College, which is a small liberal arts college in Singapore, and I oversee the recruitment and review of all our applicants each year. Yeah, and I've been there for 7 years now since inception. Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about how Asia is rising as a new study destination. It's always been a study destination, but how we're seeing increase in numbers. There's a lot of talk about how the Asian universities are rising. You'll see articles everywhere. And in the first part of the presentation, we're trying to cover why we see this rise and why we feel Asia is a good destination for your students. If you see, since 2018, this is the Times Higher Education ranking, and you see how these rankings, how some universities, especially Tsinghua University in China, has moved up almost 8 spaces. And almost every university has moved up, from Hong Kong or Japan. The Asian universities are constantly climbing the ranking, ladder, and that is due to a certain reason. Now, again, how we've taken a longer period of time, 2003 to 2017, we see that the Asian universities are all ranking up. Australia is going up. Japan has gone down a little. Europe is down. US and Canada is down. So over a long period of time, almost 14 years, this is how it's gone down. United States, if you see, has moved from 160, and these are the number of universities in the top 500. So it's it's a bigger number that we've taken, and how some universities have moved down, and other newer universities are going up. If you see, this is again a new data. The cities with the most number of universities. Now, what does it mean for a student who is in, say, London or Beijing or Hong Kong for that matter, that there are 5 universities which are in the top 100 that are in one single city. So you've got a better student crowd there, you've got better faculty, there's industry alliances that are there at in the city with the universities around. So if you see how the Asian cities are all in these rankings, and pretty much if we kind of break this ranking down is to number 1, number 2, number 3, with the number of top 100 universities in those cities, we've got so many from Asia in that ranking. So this is the ranking, we've kind of redone the ranking to show this to you. Now why, when students are moving from one country to the other, and we call it student mobility, there are certain barriers. We know what is happening in every country, so let's talk about India. There are things happening here. People want to move out, move to different states. If you look at, and also move out, also because of what is happening with our education system, we see how marks and the kind of entrances, the lack of quality institutions, and so that's one. There is funding shortages that are happening in certain parts of the world for universities. They aren't getting enough funding from the governments that they are in. So if I look at what Hong Kong does, every university, all the top universities get funding from the government. And this funding is not only for scholarships, but also to make innovation labs, to help students find start entrepreneurial ventures on their own. So the governments are funding this kind of work, which and there's not enough money in certain countries. There are immigration tensions, yes, banning of visas or from different parts of the world, or even, I think today there was a news of someone being refused a visa uh, because of some Facebook post. That's a different thing, but accommodation. So student accommodation is also becoming a problem. There are certain places that are very expensive, mm, not available, not safe. Uh, the others is, just I don't want you to come in. That kind of, I'm protectionist. I don't want anyone to come in to my country. I don't want the jobs going to someone else. So these are certain barriers that happen. Now, in Hong Kong, and I have numbers for Hong Kong and Japan, uh, numbers have the undergraduate, recruitment, and these are all universities in Hong Kong, have gone up almost 10%. And this shows that, one, the universities welcome international students, they're giving enough support to international students, and that there is work once they finish their course. I think these are main reasons that a student wants to go to study overseas. And I think in Japan, it's gone up from 150,000 to 300,000, almost double the numbers, from 2011 to 2018, which is not even 10 years. So if you see Asia, which is Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, you've got China, there is a significant increase in the numbers. And why is it happening? It's happening because there's an economic power shift. So everyone knows that financial capitals are shifting from west towards the east. Singapore, Hong Kong being the so-called new financial hubs of the world. And by 2025, it's predicted that 38% of the global GDP is going to be part of Asia, which just constitutes 51% of the global population. So there is this economic shift, and with that means more jobs, better facilities, everything up. And this is mainly, China has the Belt and Road Initiative, which covers about 60 countries. Now, some think that it is China's way of, muscle power or whatever, but there is enough proof that it does help a lot of countries around. There's 60% of the world's population, 75% of the world's energy resources, and there is a lot of the world's interest being focused onto Asia. So this initiative also gets the focus of the world on to the continent. Now, if we look at the Greater Bay Area uh, in China, you see that if you kind of break it down by GDP, I know there are too many numbers here, but if you break it down by GDP, you see that it's the 13th strongest country in the world, and that is Singapore, Hong Kong, China area. So if it is 13th strongest area and it is, the GDP of US $1.3 trillion, there is more work coming in that way. Another world economy, United States has 19.39 trillion, which is 24.4%, where China is, and Japan, India, Indonesia, because of course India is an Asian country. Look at the amount, it's almost taking away the most biggest chunk of the world economy at the moment. Uh, the largest public companies, the ones in Asia, Alibaba, Samsung, Toyota, this China Mobile, they, it just shows that a lot of companies are also coming toward, these are original companies, I mean, these are companies founded in these regions. Uh, and we see a growth of almost 571% in terms of spending, everything. I mean, and income and spending for that matter. So there is enough interest and enough value to come to a place, to a country like ours. Now, another thing I wanted to show was that these are the best performing family businesses in Asia. If you see, India has the best, and the light blue one is the overall universe. So almost 50% of these best performing are also performing well in that, internationally. So what does that mean? Why am I talking about family businesses? Family businesses are entrepreneurial ventures. Entrepreneurial ventures means there is opportunity for free thought, there's opportunity for investment, more work. So these are family businesses. The next one talks about how the maximum number of Gen 1, so generation 1, not old, uh, maybe two or third or second or third generation businesses, but these are all first generation businesses. The highest number is in Asia. And again, these are young companies, they are growing companies, and they will provide better opportunity for work and for, just the whole idea of the economy being free and liberal. That's my part. I'll hand over to Sophia.
Thank you, Namrata. Okay, so for this next section, we'll be dealing with future paths in Asia. As university representatives, we get this question a lot from parents, and I think as counselors as well, you would be concerned about what the future would look like for students graduating with a degree from Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japanese universities. So hopefully in the next few slides, we can answer some of those questions, and you can take home some information to pass on to parents as well. Now so first off the bat, I just want to say that whether students choose a career path or they choose academics, they have their options available to them. And increasing opportunities, just as a continuation of what Namrata was saying, as this economic power shift that's occurring, and there are lots of growing opportunities for students, specifically from companies that are located in Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, that have branches in India as well. So there's this growing opportunity for those students. And the employment rate. Oops. So Asia in general has a very low unemployment rate compared to the rest of the world. If you look at the graph, it doesn't look like very much, but there is definitely a difference. But where does Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan stand? So Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan have 90% plus employment rate. So that's very good for students who are considering a career path in these countries. So Singapore has more than 90% students getting placed within 6 months after graduation. Hong Kong is 95% within 3 months. And Japan has hit a very high record number of 97.6%. I just put in the bracket there, shortage of workforce. As you all know, Japan does have the population crisis. That is a very big crisis, so the Japanese government is taking a lot of initiative. So there is a labor shortage, which is advantageous for the students who are studying in Japan now, the international students. And that is why that number looks very high as well. And of course, collaborative projects. India is really enjoying a very good economic tie with Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan. You all know about the bullet train project, right? Just for an example. So this is creating job opportunities specifically for students from India who want to work maybe, yes, go ahead. Yes, these numbers are inclusive of local and international students as well, yes. So yes, there are these job opportunities there as well. And I just want to mention that we must not underestimate the value of knowing an additional language. So for Indians, knowing an extra language is not something new. We all speak at least one additional language. English is our second language for most of us here. And the same goes for Singapore and Hong Kong. Japan predominantly still is Japanese, but the major cities do use English as well. So if students say, for example, if you're studying at a Japanese university completely in English, you're there for 4 years, you're obviously going to pick up the language, at least the basics by default. And if you work for a Japanese company, you can be placed in the branch that is in the US, or you can come back to India as well. So this opens up more opportunities for students, especially when you are learning languages as lucrative as Japanese, Mandarin, or Cantonese. And of course, graduate school as well is an option. Japan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, they do invest a lot of funding into research and development. And these options are available in English for all the students. And one of the questions we always get from parents is, are these degrees recognized? Yes, they are. So these are globally recognized degrees that you will get at these universities. So you can take, students can take these degrees and use them all across the world anywhere and build further on this research if they want to go that way. You know, most students don't stop at a bachelor's degree anymore. Most of them are going on to master's and doctorate as well. So that is something that they can consider as well after they finish their bachelor's degree. How does one go about looking for a job application? Now, we are quite familiar with how it works with US, UK, and Canada because some uncle, auntie, or some relative or cousin has been there and done that. Now, how does it work for Asia? It's pretty similar to how it is in India, where there are campus placements offered by the universities or online job portals. But navigating the job market can be quite challenging in a foreign country anyway. So we always encourage students to get help where it is available. And I think the best place to start with is the universities. All the universities do have some kind of a career service placement services that they offer. So start there. And I think Singapore University has a mentorship program where a personalized mentorship program, and even Hong Kong University, Nagoya University as well, just as examples to give you of the support that is given for international students. And then, of course, online job portals, which are quite similar to how it works in India as well. You know, students don't need to just wait for their professors or their administrators to give them some information. They can go out there and look for information as well. And this is open for international students as well. So just to give you a bit of a background, I studied in Japan. I graduated from the university and I started working there. And I mostly relied on the online job portals. So for international students, there's no disadvantage as such where the tools are not available to them or anything. Everything is open to them. And there are private companies that host very large job fairs for international students especially. So these are things that students can take advantage of. But with the opportunities come certain challenges as well. Okay. So we don't like to gloss over all the facts. This is true that when you're looking at Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, there are certain things that you will need to be prepared for when you're looking at the work environment. So we just listed up what certain kinds of challenges that students would be facing. Now, when it comes to Japan, language is one thing that you would need to consider. So when you're studying, you can escape maybe knowing Japanese. You can be in the bubble of international students. But when you're looking for work, you would need at least a basic level of Japanese language proficiency. And also something like the work culture. You know, Japan has this image of having long work hours and having this workaholic sort of culture. So that is something that does exist in the corporate world, which students will have to get used to, or something as simple as timekeeping. So in Japan, when somebody says 7:47, they mean 7:47. It's not 2 minutes before or 5 minutes after, something like that, something very small. And so similarly for Hong Kong, basic knowledge of Cantonese, little goes a long way. So it's always good for students to familiarize themselves with the local work culture. And of course, accommodations for Singapore and Hong Kong, they're quite expensive. You know, university housing is provided at much subsidized rates most of the time. So when students have to move out and they start their work life, they realize how expensive it is. So it's always good to have a safety net in the initial months when you're transitioning from a student to a working life. Now, getting a work permit and applying for a work visa is relatively easy and convenient compared to certain other countries where there's a dark cloud of maybe doubt that's looming. Will I get the visa? Will I get the minimum salary required to apply for a visa? These are certain questions that you don't need to be worried about when it comes to Hong Kong, Japan, and Singapore. There's a lot of support from the government as well of these countries to host more international students. So as you can see, Japan has a 6-month job hunting visa that is provided. It looks very less here, but most of the time students graduating already have an offer in hand. So you begin your job hunting process 1 year before you graduate. So most likely you won't be needing the 6 months. And Singapore and Hong Kong is even better. They have a 12-month period where students can stay back and look for work and get the work permit. Now, as long as you have an offer in hand, you can apply for a work visa. That's how simple it is for Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan. Now, when you're thinking about long-term, as Indians, we also do think, okay, how would it be if we want to settle down in these countries, invest our time and energy? Something like citizenship is something difficult to obtain, at least for Japan and even Singapore and Hong Kong, I suppose. So that's the same thing. So it can be a bit difficult. So when it's permanent residency, where you don't need to keep renewing your visa constantly, that is something that students can consider. So for Hong Kong, as you can see, you can apply for a permanent residency after 7 years, and that includes your student years. So you're getting 3 years added to this number already. Japan, it takes a little bit more time. It's about 8 to 10 years or so, after which you can apply for permanent residency, but that does not include your student year. So you need to spend more time in the country. And Singapore is granting about 30,000 PRs per year. So there is this drive to have more international students after they graduate to stay back. That's the goal, to be contributing to the workforce as well for these 3 countries. Okay, so I'm going to pass on to Jasmine for the learning and curriculum part.
Thank you very much for coming for the first session, 8:30. At least it was a challenge for me, so we appreciate everyone being here. We're pleasantly surprised. Yesterday evening, we were wondering to ourselves, like, how many people would come, and we were like, oh, thank you. So my name is Jasmine, as I said. I work with the Yale-NUS College in Singapore, which is a small liberal arts college. My colleagues have given you an overview to the landscape in Asia and higher education opportunities and employment. And what I want to talk about basically is the learning experience and in a way to sort of like dispel some myths that people may have about universities in Asia and their offerings. So I've got this pretty little fourth industrial revolution slide. I think we are all keenly aware of the impact, right, that the digital revolution is going to have or has currently on our lives, but that's going to impact the learners and the students and the families that we work with in ways that are unprecedented. I think no matter how prepared we want to be, the digital revolution is going to essentially, right, I'm going to quote Carl Schwab here, going to blur the lines between, you know, the digital, the physical, and biological spheres. We have things like wearable technology, we have AI, we have machine learning, you know, that's even impacting admissions. Some institutions around the world are employing AI field bots, right, to assist with matching student ability and suitability for certain courses. So I think as you know, people who are participating in that conversation about higher education in Asia, it's actually incumbent upon us to pay attention to this relationship, right, between education, power, and obviously inequality, and how maybe very traditional, I would say, and don't quote me on this, but like very Western-centric ways of thinking about education privilege those who already have that and own that space. So this is an important conversation to be part of. So the things that I think our schools are doing, and I don't mean just specific to the 3 institutions that we represent, but schools across Asia are responding incredibly flexibly to the digital revolution. I think what we need to bear in mind is that ultimately, I think you as counselors, us as university representatives, are looking for ways to ensure that our students have mobility, right? Getting an education, getting that degree, I think is the fundamental, right? We want them to finish school, get that degree, but we want them to also have and reflect those habits of mind and those skills that will allow them to keep learning, right? We keep saying this to our students, you're gonna go into jobs that don't even exist now, right? We keep saying that because to be honest, we don't really know what's going to happen. But we tell them, we want you to have an opportunity that's going to equip you with the skills and the flexibility of mind to take on those challenges. And that is exactly what the schools are doing for our students, right? To provide globalized experience, I would say, in unique contexts that are supported. I think there is a misconception that schools in Asia are not providing student-centric experiences, but I think you will know as well as we do that this is quite untrue. So I hope to give you a few examples of how we are trying to deliver, or we do deliver, higher education with a cultural and ideological diversity that the students need. So I think all our institutions here, University of Hong Kong, Yale-NUS College, Nagoya University, do offer different kinds of integrative and active learning. So when we talk about things like lectures, seminars, we're looking also at things like the flipped classroom, like online learning modules. Some institutions like the Singapore University of Technology and Design employ a very creative method where their students actually each have to participate and actually complete over 20, right, real life industry relevant problems as part of their degree course. And my colleagues would be happy to share more examples from our different institutions. And then I think one of the other questions here is what kinds of degrees do you offer? I think there is also this sort of tendency to think about Hong Kong, Japan, or Singapore as like business, right? And maybe 5 or 10 years ago, engineering, obviously. But actually, this is a kind of like just a short list, really, of the programs that we thought were the most popular when international students are looking at Singapore. And these are largely open to the international student. I think the one caveat would be the medical program. I think in some contexts, like for example in Hong Kong, you might need a certain amount of conversational Cantonese, right, to be able to participate. And obviously, I think in Singapore, it's a very stringent program. Even for Singaporeans, it's difficult to be admitted to medical school. But we do have graduate medical programs, like with the Duke-NUS school, where a fairly large number of international students can enroll. So that's one. And there are a wide number of double degree programs and joint degree programs that our institutions have formed with global partners across North America, across the UK, and Europe as well. And the number of exchange programs is incredible. Like I think yesterday we did a little count. Nagoya has over 400 international partners. The University of Hong Kong, slightly over 300 or over 300. And suddenly, National University of Singapore has over 300 partners in like 40 countries. So I think one of the concerns or thinking about going abroad is just getting there. And students often stop, at that point, thinking, what else can I do there being an international student? And we want you to know that your student is in no way disadvantaged being an international student. They have access to opportunities. I'll speak very briefly about the college that I work with, Yale-NUS. So we have like almost half our student body is international. And we have more international opportunities available to our students than we have students. Sophia mentioned we actually do one-to-one mentoring for our students to do portfolio management. So basically everybody gets to go abroad. And that's the same for Singapore Management University, where it's a guaranteed global experience. Everybody gets to go abroad at SMU. These are 3 of the programs that we wanted to highlight. The Bachelor of Arts and Sciences at the University of Hong Kong. Nagoya University is one of the universities that participates in the Global 30 international programs. And of course, there are other very popular programs like the one at Waseda, and then we have things like the Politics, Law, and Economics degree, which is a hot new favorite at SMU in Singapore, and obviously Yale-NUS College. So for a student doesn't have to be looking specifically at a professional degree, right, to be part of that higher education experience in Asia. There are lots of different opportunities available to them. So again, just in one slide, the exchange programs that we've got available to students. It's surprising, I think, how robust they are. We're looking consistently across the institutions at like semester to year-long study around the world. And it's not just students from Asia or in Asian schools looking sort of like to the Western Hemisphere, but also within Asia, we have many different opportunities for cross-cultural exchange. Previously, I talked a little bit about the importance of having that sort of like participating in that paradigmatic shift, right? Looking at cultural and ideological diversity and relevance. And we see more and more students going to countries within this region, right? And for exchange. So for research, now if your student is interested in possibly a future path in academia, or they like working with professors, they want that exposure, all our institutions offer some kind of exchange and on-site experience at a laboratory. Certainly in Hong Kong. Japan, you'll see that there are actually a lot of collaborative research projects between companies and university research labs. So obviously for a student, that gives them not just the experience that they want, but it's also a really nice check on their CV, right? Helps them with their job search, and helps them acquire skills that are attractive to future employers. And in Singapore, I won't speak for Hong Kong and Japan specifically now, but in Singapore, an international student can work paid for up to 16 hours per week. Many of our students do work. I mean, it's a great way to pay your rent, get some pocket money, but also to get the experience. And they're employed across different industries in Singapore. So I wanted to just share this quick slide. We've talked a lot about international student mobility. The number of international students has actually increased significantly. I think this refers specifically to Japan, just as an example, the number of students increasing over the last sort of like 10 to 15 years. And you can see that in sort of like blue there, the spike, and obviously in red. The red is the number of international students, so it has really gone up quite exponentially in in the last decade or so. Surprisingly, and even for myself, I didn't quite realize this, but higher education institutions in Asia are drawing increased diversity. There's a UNESCO World Report that was published in 2016, and basically East Asia and the Pacific region actually hosted 19% of the world's international students, which is just only slightly behind North America and Western Europe. So there is incredible diversity in the area, and our campuses actually are home to students from all over the world. The University of Hong Kong has over 100 nationalities on that campus. The campus I work on has over 60, in Nagoya over 95, right? So it's an incredibly culturally diverse space, politically also a very diverse space if students want to participate in those conversations. And in terms of quotas and limits, what's one of the great anxieties that I think those of you who are working in schools have, the student wonders, what if we don't get a space? Is there a huge cap on international students? Are they very stringent? Actually, you'd be surprised to know, I think, that there's actually an incredible amount of institutional support for the international student, right? In Hong Kong, there's flexibility, 25% of the intake is for international students. In Japan, you've got state, basically national funding, right, to drive that student diversity and encourage institutions to look for international students. Scholarships are available to help to defray the cost of attendance in Japanese schools. And similarly, in Singapore, students who are international can opt into what we call the tuition grant scheme, which is essentially a government-driven subsidy off the cost of tuition, and they don't have to pay it back. They just need to commit to working for 3 years after they graduate. And as my colleague Sophia has talked about previously, it's really not that hard to find a job. So a lot of students take the subsidy and get a nice discount. The last point there on the slide is transitional programming. So I think we could do a better job of publicizing our international student orientations. They are incredibly fun, diverse. Unfortunately, the media likes to pick up the negative side of things. There was a recent sort of article in Singapore about international student, about orientation that wasn't that enticing, but all our institutions offer very robust transitional programming. At my college, we actually do teach a transitions module for students who are kind of navigating that transition between college and high school, and especially for students, I think, who identify, for example, as third culture, right? My institution does also offer additional support for students who identify as such. Just a sort of like couple last logistical points to note. English as a medium of instruction. So it varies very, very slightly between our schools. So in Hong Kong, English is, right, the main language of instruction. There are some programs that are bilingual in their teaching, like in Mandarin, and as I mentioned earlier, for, say, medicine courses, some amount of conversational Cantonese and Mandarin is required. Some have second language requirements, but Namrata assures us that actually these are easily fulfilled by your students' class 10 language studies. So they don't need to go out there and take another course to fulfill this requirement. And Japanese universities offer full programs in English language. So that's not an issue for your students. And students who have Japanese language proficiency have increased access to other programs in their institutions. Singapore, English is the main language of instruction, and many different foreign language courses are available to our students, especially if they're interested, well, not especially, but we do have a wide number of Asian languages available, but also European languages and even the classics. If they want to do ancient Latin and Greek, they are welcome to do so at Yale-NUS. All right, so very last slide for our presentation today, and then we have time for some questions. So all schools accept the national and the international curriculums from India, not an issue. Standardized testing, so there's a slight variation here. So Nagoya and does not require standardized testing, and the universities across Hong Kong do not as well. Yale-NUS will, similar to a lot of schools in the US, will require an SAT or an ACT as part of submission. Our application platforms, you can see that there's a combination. So Hong Kong, there's the common application and also the institutional application available to your student. Nagoya, the institutional application is easily accessible. And for Yale-NUS, we are also on the common application, and we have an institutional application. And the typical timeline, we'd encourage you to go head to our websites and get the full details. But Hong Kong has a deadline in mid-November. Other Hong Kong unis typically in mid-January, you have to make your submission. Nagoya has a deadline in mid-December, and Yale-NUS, we have a January deadline and a March deadline. Yeah, okay. We have time for questions. If you want to ask us anything specific as a group, or maybe after we've cleared the room separately as well. Okay, thank you. Questions? Tea time. Living expenses. We do one by one.
Okay. So for Hong Kong, the range of tuition fees is about 1,20,000 Hong Kong dollars to 1,60,000 Hong Kong dollars, which comes out to be about 9 lakh rupees. For accommodation, HKU specifically, we subsidize all international student accommodation to about 15,000 Hong Kong dollars per year only. So wherever you stay and university, even if you're staying outside, uh, the university will pay accommodation scholarship to every international student. But for others, it's about 1,20,000 for accommodation. So for HKU, the fees is high, the tuition fee is high, but the accommodation is lower, and living expenses about 4,000 Hong Kong dollars per year. Uh, and that's about, so the total fee for HKU, I would say if a student has about 18 lakh rupees, it's good enough. Scholarships are automatic for Hong Kong HKU, and it's based on a particular criteria, so it's based on marks only in grade 12, and which is a well publicized criteria. There are no grays here, and it ranges from 30,000 on exchange to half tuition, full tuition, tuition and accommodation and living for all 4 years, renewable if the student achieves a GPA of 3 out of 4.3. That's the requirement. So scholarships, other universities also have a lot of scholarships, and these are all automatic. There isn't an extra application that they require.
Okay, so for Japan, it's quite different compared to national and private universities. So if I had to give a range, I would say 5,000 US dollars per year is what national universities would cost, and could go up to 17,000. What do you think? 17,000 US dollars for private universities. Yeah. So on a range, it will be 5,000 to about 15 to 17,000 US dollars per year. So education is much more affordable, as you can see, but maybe the cost of living might be a bit more expensive. Maybe say 10 to 12,000 US dollars per year. So the cost of living is either similar or more than what it would cost the annual tuition fee there. Now, when it comes to scholarships, there are university offered scholarships. So each university have their own criteria. Either it's a half scholarship, or in case of Nagoya University, it's a full scholarship. And then there are the government scholarships as well that have more stipend, that you would get monthly allowances, plus the tuition fees also waived off in many of the cases. And there are also private companies offering scholarships as well out there. So those are certain things students will have to search for themselves. But if you're looking for university and government scholarships, you can always contact the university for more details about that.
For Singapore, so what we call the public schools, the autonomous universities, do offer scholarships for international students. There are a range of ways to apply. So I'll speak specifically to Yale-NUS. So for Yale-NUS College, we have the privilege of being a need-blind and also aid awarding institution. We're one of the very few in the world for international students. So our incoming class for 2019, I think 63% of our students actually receive some kind of financial aid or a scholarship. The financial application is very easy to use. It's nothing quite like the FAFSA or the CSS profile. We're looking at tax documents from the year prior. And the scholarship has no additional application. The student just applies to us, and basically we assess them based on what we see and then merit in that application and what we see in the interview. In terms of like cost of living, I think Crazy Rich Asians has really changed the way people think about Singapore. I wish we all drove around in our Lamborghinis, and actually no, I don't wish we do. It's quite awful. It's actually surprisingly affordable for a student to live in Singapore because public transport is very affordable. for students because they get student subsidized rates. I think rent, at Yale-NUS, all our students live on campus. It's a full residential four-year program, so they don't need to worry about rent or food. We also feed them. But I think if a student is going to any other school and wants to live off campus, the rental really varies. They have the student hostels, which are much more affordable. But if you're living out on your own and you're going flatting with a few friends, you can expect to pay maybe between $300 and $500 in Singapore dollars for a room. And then if you're looking for a much more luxurious sort of situation where maybe you want to share a condo with a friend, then maybe 1,000 Sing, which is like 800 USD. I don't know many students who do that. But things really only get expensive, honestly, I think when they're trying to buy a car or they're trying to buy an apartment. But other than that, the day-to-day eating and transport is actually extremely affordable. Yeah.
One thing about HKU, so last year's intake, not this year, but the last year's intake, we had about approximately 90 students from India going. Almost 80 were on scholarship, some form of scholarship. Okay, so HKU requires the IBDP. IB certificate is not accepted. And depending on the program, so HKU will definitely look at marks. We will not substitute an extracurricular activity for grades. So that's a bottom line. You have to get the minimum requirement for that course. And if you go to the admissions website, you have criteria for the previous year's entry. So if in the Indian curriculum, if it says 85% you can apply, you can go and see for that particular course, whatever course, be it econ or finance or engineering, what was the minimum percentage that was admitted in the previous year. So it's very clear, you can get an idea, but I would say a range of 35 IB points to 44 IB points for the most competitive programs is what we're looking at. And yes, there is an interview that happens. So every student who applies and is admissible will be called for an interview in December. We do it in 3 cities, Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore, and where they're they're required to analyze a piece of a news article and then go into a group discussion to discuss that. The more competitive programs like the IBGM or the engineering faculty will interview students, the faculty interview students over Skype. So that is going to be there, but only if you meet the cut. So you could be a bright student but perform very badly in the interview and not be admitted. So the minimum academic requirements is definitely important.
For the public universities, and I'll broadly say SMU, the Singapore Management University, NTU, NUS, SUTD, all accept the IB diploma. Typically not the IB certificate, I would say. And then with more detail, so Yale-NUS, I think about almost 30% of our cohort is IB diploma holding students. And in terms of grade thresholds, it's a holistic admission process. I'm sure you've heard that again and again. But in terms of like student performance, our students tend to perform on the high end of the scale. We typically make offers to students with predicted scores of like the high 30s and close to 40s. Obviously, we're very sensitive to the fact that I think within Singapore there is a high pressure for IB students to perform to a very, very high standard, and we are, I would say, more realistic when we look at the global pool of students that we have. We're not benchmarking them against Singapore sort of like typical IB diploma performance. Yeah.
So for Japan, generally speaking, yes, IB is accepted, but IB diploma is what everybody's looking for. Students who are taking IB certificate, that alone will not be enough, so they'll have to couple it with a diploma from the high school as well. So otherwise, IB diploma is what is required. And I'm speaking specifically for Nagoya University. When it comes to the requirements, we don't have a minimum IB score requirement because depending on what program students are applying for, the professors are looking at different things. So in case of science or engineering, they'd be looking more at specific subjects as compared to the overall. And the requirements for different universities varies, so you'll have to check the admission requirements for that. But I'm just saying specifically for Nagoya University. Yeah, hope that answers your question though. Yeah.
How many A levels would be fine?
Well, for,
Three.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Three for it, yeah. Yeah, minimum three.
We actually don't have a minimum, so even with one, students can apply on paper, but when you're looking at the competitiveness, have at least three, yes.
Well, the graduate employment survey that's done for all the autonomous universities, consistently you're looking at placement rates of like 93% and upwards within 6 months of graduation. And that number doesn't take into account students who go freelance or decide not to work if they want to pursue something else. I think there is a perception that it's very difficult to find work. But I also think that, to be honest, and we've all been there, there's a kind of like a balance between expectation of the dream job that you want as an entry-level student who just graduated and the job you can have. And we're always trying to balance that expectation. A lot of students do get competitive offers, good offers at salaries that allow them to live comfortably in Singapore. But I would say for international students, I think there's kind of like a strong trend that they gravitate towards very competitive industries, right? The way that Singapore is a financial hub and a research hub in many ways. So I think there is a realistic competition in the marketplace. But statistically, I think it can feel very difficult, but the stats all show that students are getting placed very comfortably and getting employment passes without too much of a challenge.
I yeah, just let me just finish. In Hong Kong, within 3 months before uh, October, most of the students at our university are placed. We have a track record of 99.8%, 99.7 to 99.8% for the last 10 years. So the employment is easy. When you have a job, you can stay back and work for as long as you have the job contract. That's all over Hong Kong. Now, adding to what Jasmine said, it's not about jobs being available only. Of course, you see that it's allowed, you're allowed to stay back and look for a job. It also depends on what the student has done in his 4 years at the university. Has he taken or she taken up internships while there? How is the grade? I mean, if you're a bad student, no one, even in India, would take you. So it's about how you've developed your skills. Are there additional languages you've picked up? Is there an internship that you did and did it well? How forthcoming were you? How is, have you, just made yourself more employable is what matters also. So as counselors, we need to tell them that it's, okay, these are the rules. You could have a rule of, you can work as long and you can stay back for as long. But even then, the ones who don't get a job don't get it for certain reasons. So I think as counselors, we must get them to understand that there is some responsibility on you too.
Sure, sure, sure. Well, I have the privilege of working at a very small school, right? 250 students per cohort, so there's also fewer parents numerically. So we're lucky, and our student services and Dean of Students Office actually aggressively, I should use the word aggressively, actually extends communication to parents. I think from the point that the student is admitted, so we have a newsletter, everything that goes out to them. We do have parent weekend. We tell them very blatantly and very clearly, this is the typical salary range that you should expect a student to get. This is the minimum requirement for an employment pass in Singapore to be issued. These are the ranges of salaries that the government has done, like seen in surveys. That's realistic. Everything outside of that, if your student graduates and gets a job offer for like 150K per year, well, good on them. But this is what the trend data is. I think as an institution, I think within the country, there's a very sort of like transparent approach towards data, and the Singapore government has this wonderful website, which is just like data.gov.sg, and you can look up everything there, from like how much water is being consumed to like how many people are employed or unemployed. So I think there's a huge sort of push towards transparency. Yeah.
you know, in their face and a more candid answer. But I think exactly that we just put the last years and the average salaries, but mothers are mothers. So.
And just to add to that, in Japan, usually all freshers start with a specific basic amount. So there's no escaping that in most cases. So we just kind of lay that information flat out for them.
Yeah. So, Malaysia, I know that there are a lot of campuses of international universities in Malaysia. And you've got Monash, you've got Nottingham, you've got some, UK universities with their campuses and Australian universities. So of course that is, and it's much cheaper than their UK or Australian counterpart. Um, I'm not very confident about anything other than that, about work or the culture there. But I think uh, Indonesia, I know of a very good architecture school, and so there are these options. There, Korea, Korea as well. Yes,
Korea is kind of similar to Japan in the
yeah,
courses that they offer.
yes. Yes, medical programs are there, but again, with medical programs and especially Indian students going out, there have been changes recently. So I think one must be very careful when you're looking at medicine overseas, but and also about how many can get in. Like for Hong Kong, we need Cantonese because you're going to be dealing with patients. So conversational Cantonese is important. Like our Indian doctors need to know Hindi or whichever language state they are in to be able to talk to patients. I think other than that, I'm not very confident. And I mean, India is there, Asia. So China is, of course,
We launched the government launched what was termed the Global Schoolhouse Project. About a decade ago to really diversify the landscape. And there's not a lot of literature and research on the subject. I was just reading a paper on that yesterday, but um, there's actually incredible range of programs and even I think from my perspective as a practitioner in the university, I would caution like parents and students to really do their research because as we all know, there's so many different variations and accreditations available, and I would only feel confident to speak on the behalf of public government-funded institutions in Singapore.
So, for all universities in Hong Kong, ISC, CBSE, state boards are accepted. So we have students from junior colleges in Maharashtra, or we've got CBSE students, or mainly it's actually more CBSE, ISC in Hong Kong. Carl, it's the same? Yeah. And IBDP, of course, because the schools are newer, but the requirements, especially for Hong Kong, are very high for IB. So a student for HKU, if they're about 90%, they'll be admissible. I mean, they're admitted to most of our programs. Some would require a higher requirement, and I think for PolyU, 85? 80 and above CBSE. So there is no distinction. Our faculty understands the curriculum very well. And in fact, they prefer at times students from the CBSE and ISC boards. They understand that the science is very strong, the math is very strong, and it is a very academically rigorous course and university. So yes, absolutely acceptable. And no IELTS or TOEFL required for us. Just your CBSE or ISC English marks are enough.
So when it comes to Japan, at least Nagoya University, most of the Indian students who do apply are applying with either CBSE or ISC, a few of them from IB. So the professors do have an understanding of the curriculum. And also in our selection process, we have an interview as well. So that's one way to just check the academic aptitude of the students, not just completely based on only what's on paper that way. And just as Namrata said, we also, Japan is not a native English-speaking country, so IELTS, TOEFL, if they have it, they can submit it. Otherwise, if you've been studying an English medium for the last 4 years of high school, it's fine, you can still apply.
And for Yale-NUS as well, the CBSE absolutely recognized, and we don't like. One question I tend to get is, you compare them against IBDP students, and they're not. So we read them within the school group and the qualification type, so that they're not disadvantaged in any way. And we're very familiar with the curriculum and its rigor. A large number of our students coming from India have graduated with the CBSE, and for that matter, even students within Singapore as well. Some do also offer the CBSE as a qualification. Yeah.
Also, so they get credit transfers, CBSE, ISC students don't get that. The other thing you have to understand is that we all have conditional offers. But suppose, there's an overall, and we keep hearing this, the CBSE, English marks have gone down, newspaper articles, or ISC has not done well in economics. So we do understand that. And one of the roles of me being here is to make the faculty understand what the curriculum is and how it's, what's happening around. So we do ask the schools for data. If there has been a particular subject which students in your school haven't performed, we reach out to you and ask you for data for comparing, and we present that to the faculty and they will look at it. So they do understand the curriculum and the way our education system works in India very well. I've called Carl for this.
I'm from Poly in Hong Kong. The answer is please apply, at least, because you never know what would happen. And what you see from TV is totally correct. No fake news, but it may not reflect the whole situation. For instance, there are fights at the airport, but it just lasts for 2 days. And the airport after that 2 days is totally peaceful because the court has ordered a warrant to not allow protesters to enter with security measures. And we are still having protests mainly on weekends, peacefully mainly, but the TV will show the more valuable part for reporting. Most of the parts, like 98% of Hong Kong is peaceful. So students, we have already received students from our Hong Kong institutions, no problem at all. So please apply, or they don't even get a chance. Yeah.
I think the other thing you have to understand that when in India we have protests, so forget protests, we have a Jagrata, okay? I'm sorry for those who don't understand that. Everyone litters and gets angry, you see the roads, it's at least in Delhi, it's full of litter. The protesters, I hope you saw that piece when they came and cleaned up the airport and the train stations. So they're protesting, but they're protesting peacefully. And there's certain pockets that it's happening in. If you avoid it, the campuses are absolutely safe. There is nothing on the campus. So the students, and all the students who have to join have already joined university. They've gone. I mean, HKU has started. So they're there at university, and I haven't had a single phone call from a parent for the last 4 days. So I'm sure everything is fine.
I'm a representative from the City University of Hong Kong. So the way I see these protesting activities, like I explained to a lot of parents, actually, I don't see these protesting activities will last for, continuously last for many months ahead. So like what Carl has said, we encourage you to apply. By the time you probably next year when the school term starts, the semester starts, this thing will very likely be over already. And the best thing about protesting in Hong Kong, they come in a very organized and civilized manner. So that's the thing about protesting in Hong Kong.
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much. And for coming. I know the first session always is the most difficult one, even for us, but thank you so much.